Welcome, fellow explorers, to Project Makirraji. Over the course of our exploration of life on land, we have seen the various ecosystems that have arisen on the supercontinent of Kyifura and the life forms that have evolved to make the most of them. But now, after hundreds of millions of years of relatively stable conditions, the ecosystems of Kyifura are going to be thrown into disarray as the supercontinent finally splits. The most immediate effects of this event would pertain to the climate. What was once inland steppe and deserts has now become new coastlines. Mountains on the coasts will continue to rise, affecting weather patterns across the planet. The increased exposure of fresh rock will trigger heightened levels of silicate weathering. Silicate weathering is a process by which atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolves in rainwater, forming carbonic acid. This acid then falls to the planet's surface, where it then breaks down silicate rocks, releasing dissolved minerals such as calcium, magnesium, and silica. This process takes significant levels of carbon dioxide out of the planet's atmosphere, therefore lowering the planet's overall temperature. Snow and ice that accumulates on these mountains increases the planet's albedo, which is the planet's reflectivity of solar radiation. The less solar radiation reaches the planet, the cooler the planet will become. This essentially creates a runaway effect in which the cooler temperatures allow for the formation of more snow and ice, increasing the albedo and cooling temperatures even further. This effect may eventually launch Makirraji into its first major ice age. However, an ice age on Earth and an ice age on Makirraji may be very different things. Makirraji's orbit places it further out than Earth, comparatively. This leads to Makirraji having much cooler temperatures on average. Thus, for an ice age on Makirraji to occur, the circumstances would be much more extreme. Makirraji has always had polar ice caps, but with the onset of the Ice Age, glacier and ice sheets may cover large portions of the planet's surface. The advance of the ice would also drastically lower sea levels, creating new land and islands across the planet. Another consequence of the breakup of Kyifura is that, with the exception of extremely widespread species, the inhabitants of the two continents are now separated from one another, meaning that any evolutionary development on one continent won't affect species on the other. This is called Allopatry, in which two populations of the same species are separated by a geological barrier that prevents them from interbreeding. This means that the ecosystems will gradually differentiate themselves from one another, which means that we will have to start keeping track of the distribution of our clades on a continental scale. To start with, the northeastern continent of Dexterterra has drifted primarily eastward while maintaining a slight poleward skew. Large mountain ranges border the continent's northern and eastern coasts, with a minor mountain range to the south. This placement of mountains may act as a trap for western winds. As moist air from the newly formed ocean in between the continents moves, it flows towards Dexterterra. Its northern mountains direct the air towards the eastern mountains, where the air can be funneled out. The gradual angle of the mountains allows them to redirect air like this, for if the air were to hit them straight on, the air would pile up before dumping over the mountain. This funneling of moist air will promote heavy precipitation. However, the onset of the Ice Age would drastically cool temperatures. Therefore, this continent plays host to extreme blizzards, katabatic winds, and persistent fog. This creates an extremely harsh environment which some life may not be adapted for. The rainforest and desert clades would quickly be wiped out, only surviving on Kyifo. However, some clades are already pre-adapted to thrive in this environment. the Proledont and the Tectudont first evolved to cope with the planet's northernmost regions, but as the influence of the Ice Age spreads and pushes back less adaptable species, these creatures find themselves in a world all their own. The Proledont's thick layers of fat and specialized pilotants make them perfectly adapted for the Ice Age. As other creatures are driven southward, these creatures may spread across most of the continent. However, as these creatures spread, they will soon come in contact with larger predators and increased competition. If these creatures are to continue to spread, they will need to develop some kind of defense. Larger herbivores such as the Ignodonta have been relegated to the southernmost portions of the continent. Therefore, there is nothing stopping these creatures from reaching megafaunal status. These large sizes would offer protection from predators, along with the intimidation factor to drive smaller herbivores out of their territory. However, larger sizes require more food to sustain. Therefore, these creatures may not share the range of their smaller relatives. Instead, these creatures may inhabit more temperate latitudes where food is more abundant, although they are still capable of weathering the extreme cold. We will call these creatures the Ammochidont. As the Ammochidont spread, their reproductive strategies will inevitably shift. The Proledonts mated whenever they could, as coming across another of their species was rare in the deep Arctic. But now that these creatures inhabit more temperate latitudes, the implication of choice is reintroduced. In a previous episode, the concept of R and K selection was introduced. Typically, animals with larger body sizes tend to favor K selection, opting to have fewer offspring but invest more heavily into those offspring. Thus, most species of these Ammochidon would be K-selective. Even then, these creatures would be more K-selective than others, seeing as the mother carries her eggs using her hindmost legs. However, this burden is only applicable to females. This is called Bateman's principle, which states that when reproductive burden is uneven between males and females, the greater burden almost always falls upon the female. The result of this principle is that males are incentivized to reproduce as much as possible, while females must make sure their attempts at reproduction are worth the investment. This means that males may have to compete with one another to secure the right to mate. Therefore, these creatures will need some way to display their fitness to females. However, since only the males need to display their fitness, this may lead to a phenomenon called sexual selection, in which animals evolve based on which traits best attract mates. Sexual selection often results in sexual dimorphism, in which the different sexes exhibit different characteristics. These creatures already exhibit sexual dimorphism in their hind legs. While the hind legs of females are large in order to carry the eggs, the hind legs of males are smaller and don't serve much of a purpose. Sexual dimorphism is highly correlated with mate competition. If the males experience greater competition, it is likely that they will be larger than the females. This may also be the case in these creatures. If competition between males is extreme, males may have structures such as antlers or horns to spar with other males. In these Ammochidonts, their tentacles may develop large shield-like structures made of bone, which they use to spar with other males. However, these sparring matches could result in serious injury or even death, which would limit the male's long-term reproductive success. We will call these fighting giants the Scutocudent. As the Ammochidont and the Proledont spread across the continent, the Tectudont will follow. As they migrate southward with their prey, they will encounter larger predators and fiercer competition. If they are to survive in temperate latitudes, they will need to adapt. Competition from the already established cetodont may prevent them from achieving larger sizes, instead opting to stay small, feeding on prey of no interest to the cetodont, such as the mulariforms. The teeth at the tips of their tentacles may develop smooth grinding surfaces, allowing them to supplement their diet with plant matter. In the cold deserts and tundra that cover most of the continent, these creatures with their smaller sizes will have an advantage, needing less food to sustain themselves. However, Bateman's principle comes into consideration yet again. The cold desert and tundra, although able to support higher populations than the deep Arctic, are still habitats where coming across another of their kind, let alone the opposite sex, is a rarity. Interestingly, at a certain population density, males become incentivized to invest more heavily in one female, rather than expend unnecessary energy seeking out multiple mates. The scarcity of resources and others of their kind may prompt the evolution of monogamy. Monogamy is a reproductive strategy in which an animal stays with only a single mate at a time. Monogamy is most common when mates are few and the young have a high probability of dying. However, tectudont females withhold their eggs until a few days before hatching, then laying the young in a carcass, which allows them to build their strength quickly before becoming independent. Therefore, males won't need to engage in childcare, perhaps only taking care of the female while she is pregnant. Once the eggs are laid in a carcass, both parents will depart, finding new mates shortly after. This behavior is called serial monogamy, in which an animal repeatedly engages in multiple monogamous relationships. These creatures, which we will call thecopades, will be some of the most adaptable creatures on the continent. One of the groups most negatively impacted by the Ice Age are the Neropods. During the onset of the Ice Age, this group was pushed back to the southernmost parts of the continent. Their small, boneless bodies don't offer much in terms of insulation. Larger clades such as the Zalicapod have a much better chance of survival. These creatures are already pre-adapted to life in harsh conditions as they evolved in seasonal areas. However, the bitter cold of the Ice Age would pose a particular challenge. The tundra may simply be too cold for these creatures, however, more temperate latitudes may offer more opportunity. The recently evicted clades that could not handle the colder temperatures will leave their niches vacant. As these creatures move into the temperate latitudes, they may develop a bulkier build. Their legs may shrink, and their snout, once used to dig through the substrate, might also shrink. These changes decrease the animal's surface area, preventing unnecessary heat loss. Additional layers of fat would further aid in keeping the creature warm. These creatures developed estivation to help them weather the dry season, and this adaptation is of great use in the colder regions. However, estivation is a state of dormancy triggered by particularly hot, dry conditions, and this description no longer fits the behavior of the Zalicapod. A more fitting label would be hibernation, a state of dormancy typically associated with colder temperatures. These creatures can hibernate for extended periods of time, avoiding particularly harsh conditions by burying themselves in the substrate. These creatures' fat reserves may be used to supply the creature with nutrients while they are hibernating. These cold-adapted Zalicapods, which we will call the Somnocorp, will be some of the most resilient creatures on the continent, being able to weather some of the harshest conditions on Dexterterra. Other creatures, such as the Celerodont, won't fare as well. The Celerodont evolved in the open expanses of the steppe. With the onset of the Ice Age, these creatures would be pushed back, confined to the southern forests where they can still find enough food to sustain themselves. This change in habitat may prompt a change in diet. Varieties of Terrategro, Morategro, Atracaphyta, and low-hanging tree branches will make up these creatures' diet. The dense foliage of the forests and swamps that these creatures inhabit provides substantial cover from predators, but they still heavily rely on their speed to escape danger. A change in behavior may add to their defenses. Herding behaviors grant these creatures added protection. The larger the herd, the more eyes looking out for danger. Herding behaviors also lessen the risk of attack. The larger the herd, the more likely a predator will go after a different individual, therefore lessening the risk of any one individual being attacked. These creatures, which we'll call the corpidants, will rely on speed, herding behaviors, and the cover of the undergrowth to avoid the many predators also forced into the southern forests by the advance of the Ice Age. Such predators include the citadant, who have been almost completely confined to the southern forests. The citadant are adapted for the life of a fast-paced pursuit hunter, chasing down prey over long distances. Their long legs and flexible bodies give them an edge in the forest environment. Being able to dodge and weave through the undergrowth would allow these creatures to chase down less nimble prey. The large Divirudonta may be too formidable for these creatures to risk attacking. Instead, they may prey upon smaller creatures such as the corpidants. To catch these creatures, they might develop new forms of weaponry. These creatures' arms are one of their greatest assets, being used to manipulate the world around them. As these limbs become increasingly useful in catching prey, they may evolve to oppose one another, giving them the ability to grab prey with their claws while simultaneously inflicting serious damage. The elongation of these limbs would grant these creatures a greater range of attack. Now that their arms have taken over the role of subduing prey, their tentacles may shrink, only being used to inflict lethal blows once the prey is in range. These citadant, which we'll call the brachydactyl, will be some of the top predators on Dexterterra. The mathiladent have also been forced into the southern forest by cooling temperatures. The mathiladent first evolved in the open steppe, feeding on the carcasses of dead animals. However, in the forest, carcasses won't last long, with most of the meat being decomposed by the abundant Morategro and the mulariforms. The only thing left behind are the parts of the animal that aren't easily broken down, such as bone. So some mathiladent may adapt to feed on the bones left behind. Gyrophagy is a feeding behavior associated with adaptations for cracking open and eating hard structures such as shells and bone. For most other creatures, the bones of the carcass are inedible, and thus these mathiladent will face very little competition as they specialize in gyrophagy. Gyrophagy doesn't provide nearly as much food as feeding on flesh, and thus these creatures would be smaller than their relatives. Gyrophagy is commonly associated with round, blunt teeth, perfectly adapted to break materials such as bone. They may also develop an advanced digestive tract with multiple chambers and especially powerful stomach acid to dissolve bones. We will call these creatures asegnodants. Creatures on the southwest continent of Kyifo will face a very different habitat compared to that of Dexterterra. The effects of the Ice Age are felt across the continent. Kyfo's interior is much drier than Dexterterra, supporting large inland deserts and tundra. As inland forests retreat, they may give way to large swaths of arid land, with most plant life in these regions being made up of hardier trochophytes and hydrophytes. Small forests may manage to survive around any remaining sources of fresh water. However, further south, Kyifo may support one of the largest remaining expanses of rainforest on the planet, fueled by higher equatorial temperatures and near-constant precipitation. This dramatic shift, in not only climate but also the distribution of plant life, will irreversibly alter the course of life on Kyifo. The creatures at the most risk are those that don't possess any form of thermoregulation. Creatures such as the devirdants, cicadants, and the odentidants will be pushed southward, being strictly confined to the coastal forests and swamps. Megafauna like the Belluodonta would also be pushed back, unable to contend with the freezing temperatures and lack of food. Only creatures such as the Crassodont may maintain any presence in these habitats, seeing as they are better adapted to the region's harsh conditions, using their thick layers of fat to keep them warm. Endotherms such as the Celerodont would thrive in these conditions, taking advantage of the niches left open by the clades forced southward. The Chilodont would also be present in these regions, following their prey wherever they go. However, cooler temperatures may push these creatures to the extreme. There are already a few key sexually dimorphic traits in these animals. The males are larger and more muscular while the females are smaller and require more energy when producing eggs. These differences under the pressure of the Ice Age may produce some truly bizarre adaptations. Perhaps these sexually dimorphic traits may be exemplified by the Ice Age. Males may specialize for long pursuits, as they can afford the energy needed to chase down their prey. Females, however, require the certainty of a kill if they and their developing eggs are to survive. This may push females into an ambush hunting lifestyle. These behavioral differences already differentiate the two sexes dramatically. However, these creatures may also evolve physical differences to aid them in their chosen lifestyle. Males may become further specialized for running while also retaining the strength to take down the tundra megafauna. Females, on the other hand, may become smaller and better camouflaged to hide amongst any foliage. Additionally, some females may congregate in packs to more easily take down prey. These packs may develop a complex social hierarchy, with there being a dominant female, with all subsequent females being lower down on the hierarchy. The dominant female gets first access to the kill and gets to decide how the pack hunts. The two sexes, although existing in the same areas and feeding on the same prey, can still coexist. This is because males can afford a larger territory and are able to travel further, for longer, in search of food. The two sexes, although looking and acting completely differently, still rely on one another for the continuation of the species. If and when a male and female come in contact with one another, they will mate. The female will lay her eggs buried under the sediment to protect them from the cold. Once the eggs hatch, the young will emerge as small generalists resembling neither males nor females while still being one of the two. As they grow, they will remain in this state until adolescence, at which point they will quickly grow the traits of their sex. These strange sexes will share the same name, the Eralochopod. The Celerodont of the steppe have remained largely unaffected by the cooling temperatures on Kyifo. Their endothermy allows them to weather most conditions. However, the cold of the Ice Age combined with seasonal fluctuations means that food is no longer guaranteed. Large swaths of land remain barren most of the time. For the Celerodont, who rely on the abundant steppe foliage, this is a serious issue. Perhaps these creatures begin engaging in migratory behaviors. This may first emerge as large groups of Celerodont wander together in search of food, later becoming more organized with massive herds thousands strong. These massive herds follow the most predictable routes in search of food, first traveling from down south where they spend most of their lives, up into the tundra with seasonal warmth before quickly falling back southward. These vast herds need some way of communicating. Thus these Celerodont have developed striking pelage on their neck, arms, and back. This fur is grown in a very atypical way. As the creature grows, the areas where fur may be present develop tiny bones embedded in between the layers of the skin. When the creature begins growing fur, the bones will grow longer and stretch the skin with it. The skin around these tiny bones is what gives these creatures fur its color. I will dub this structure the ossifex. The bones in the ossifex are thinner than a human fingernail and do not cost much in terms of energy to produce. Although this method of fur growth may seem unorthodox, we can actually find a parallel on Earth. The armadillo's shell is made in a very similar manner, with tiny bones growing between the skin before fusing into one hard structure. This fur is of great use in communication and has added protection from the colder habitats of the north. However, in the south it may actually hurt the creature. Such a layer of fur could cause them to overheat and possibly die from exhaustion. Thus it may be beneficial for these creatures to loose their hair when migrating southward. Thus the blood vessels that keep the ossifex alive will slowly retreat, causing the structure to die and eventually fall off. We will call these fuzzy creatures the allozontopod. The Belluodonta have also been pushed into the forests by cooling temperatures. Their large sizes may initially encumber them, making it harder for them to move through the forest. So, some species may become smaller, allowing them to move through the undergrowth with ease. Still, fallen logs, uneven terrain, and especially dense undergrowth would impede their movement. Shorter, bulkier legs would allow them to push through undergrowth, providing better balance and leverage. Their long, thick necks face a constant bombardment of branches and other foliage. Thus, these creatures' necks may shrink, becoming more flexible to reach around foliage. We will call these creatures the Collodonta. The bounty of the rainforest would facilitate a massive boom in the population of these creatures. This exponential increase in population means that, yet again, the implication of choice comes into greater consideration. This also means that Bateman's principle will come into effect, with females choosing to mate with only the fittest of males to ensure their young's survival. This forces the males to display their fitness to females in some way. Therefore, males may start adapting based on which traits best attract females. This sexual selection may lead to sexual dimorphism. One common manifestation of a sexually dimorphic trait is the presence of vibrant coloration, typically located on extravagant display structures. Perhaps one group of Collodonta develops a large crest running along the length of their back that can be raised to display vibrant pinks and purples that contrast with the yellow backdrop. This crest is supported by specialized bones with flaps of skin connecting them. These structures' sole function is to attract a mate. Thus, the only way these structures evolve in nature is through sexual selection. In extreme cases, these structures can pose an active disadvantage to the individual. In a process known as Fisherian runaway, a sexually selected trait can become so excessive that it can reduce the creature's overall chances of survival. The most recognizable example of this is the peacock's enormous tail. Structures like these take a lot of energy to grow and maintain, and can hinder their ability to escape danger. We would expect males with such cumbersome traits to be less likely to survive and reproduce. So how is it that such traits persist? Interestingly, if a male manages to survive to adulthood despite this handicap, his survival is a direct indicator of his fitness. Thus, females may prefer males with these traits, selecting for more and more extreme ornamentation. In these Collodonta, larger and larger sails may be selected for, despite the fact that they make them more visible to predators and hinder their speed. We will call these creatures the Dorvalodonta. Following their prey, and pushed southward by ever-cooling temperatures, some Magnodont may find themselves in the coastal rainforests. The rainforest is home to much more nimble prey than the megafauna they are used to hunting. Thus their hunting methods need to change. A smaller body and a more streamlined shape will allow these creatures to weave in and out of the undergrowth in pursuit of their prey. However, a chase would be futile if the Magnodon wasn't close enough in the first place. Thus these creatures may develop ambush tactics, getting as close to their prey as possible before striking. One adaptation strongly correlated with ambush hunting is a form of camouflage. Camouflage would allow these creatures to blend in with the surrounding forest, keeping them concealed until they choose to strike. This may manifest as black patterns sprawling along their bodies, breaking up their outline and allowing them to blend with the shadows. Interestingly, the other part of their patterns is a deep blue in coloration. Initially, this may seem counterintuitive. The blue coloration makes them completely stand out. However, it is important to note that we humans often consider our perception of the world as the only one. However, other animals see the world in completely different ways. These creatures' main food sources consist of Odentodonts, Volumaire, Sauroladents, Collodonta, Dorvalodonta, and the occasional Spendorodont. The Sauroladents, Collodonta, Dorvalodonta, and the Spendorodont all have eyes exhibiting dichromacy. This is an eye with only two types of color recepting cones. These animals' cones are only sensitive to red and green wavelengths. This is because these creatures are mainly herbivorous and thus have become more sensitive to the colors of their food, yellow. With no need to sense blue colors, they eventually lost the ability to. Thus, to their prey, these Magnodont appear completely camouflaged. A similar example can be seen on Earth. The tiger, known for its orange coloration, can't be seen by its prey. Although tigers stand out to us, their prey can't see orange wavelengths of light, and thus the tiger appears green. The Magnodont's coloration also serves another purpose. It allows these Magnodont, who are sensitive to red, green, and blue colors, to spot one another. This is helpful when defending territory and finding mates. We will call these creatures the Cerulodonta. When the continents rifted apart, they created vast stretches of new coastline. The creatures that inhabited what was once inland steppe and deserts are now thrusted into a completely unfamiliar environment. The mulariforms who once crawled through the steppe may now find great success in feeding on the washed-up carcasses of oceanic giants. Eventually, some mulariforms may begin venturing into the many small pools left by the tides. They may feed on any unfortunate creatures washed in from the ocean. To increase their chances at a successful hunt, some mulariforms may gain semi-aquatic adaptations. A longer body with a paddle-like tail would allow them to slink in and out of the water with ease. Their whip-like tentacles may elongate even further to ensnare their prey. And their breathing openings may move to the top of their bodies. Their legs are almost entirely useless in the water and thus may shrink. Without their legs, these creatures simply slither from pool to pool. We will call these creatures the thalassoforms. The clades we've explored in this video represent only a small fraction of the chaotic diversity that resulted from the separation of Kyfo and Dexterterra and the subsequent Ice Age. The continental split and glacial periods we've witnessed have led to vast, gradual shifts in ecosystems across the continents. But next time, we'll see a much more dramatic and rapid kind of evolution. In the next episode, we will witness some of the most strange, extreme, and downright odd ecosystems on the planet. In the next episode, we will see islands. A huge thank you to all the artists on Discord who made fan art for this episode. Your contributions to this project are invaluable. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts on these incredible creatures. See you in the next episode.